Hello everyone, it's Blake Levin. Sunday, June 5th, around 9 p.m. Driving home from the Catskills, having dropped Addie off with her grandparents at their place there, who will bring her back to Staten Island tomorrow morning. And quite frankly, one of the most difficult days of my life, as Addie is having a harder and harder time saying goodbye to me at the end of these weekends, as am I. And I was listening to Stephen Levy's Hackers on Audible, and I'm also reading it in written format. This is a book I'm going to probably reread and re-listen to many times. It's long overdue, and I started out doing it tonight in order to just take my mind off things, but you know, this all sort of blends together and gets me into very reflective moods. I'm getting ready to sell the place in the Catskills, and considering even selling the place in Manhattan. I got a 2-bedroom, and after separation, it's really just a money pit. I earn a New York salary, and I feel like a poor person after monthly expenses. So I'm starting the process of scaling down the things in my life to be more right-sized to who I am and where I am in my life. And when that blends together with the things that are being said, listening about the dawn of the computer industry, knowing that, well, I missed the first phase. I was too young for the late 60s MIT days, where it was very small circles of people who all programmed in assembly language on very high-end equipment. I guess what they would have called mini computers in those days. The mainframes were the big IBM hulks that used batch processing and card punch. You punched cards into these things, and there was a huge, movement forward with the sort of sitting in front of the machine and getting feedback in real time from PDP-1s and eventually PDP-6 and 10s. And then that was called the first generation hackers, according to this book. Second generation hackers were the ones who ordered the kit computers, the computers that, barely worked, and you had to put them together, and they had no I/O devices. And the third generation hackers were the ones on the personal computers that get more like the ones we know today, but they're already incredibly outdated and ancient by today's standards. Things like the Apple II and the TRS-80 and Commodore PET. And they're actually spending some time on the Atari 800, which is, reads remarkably like the Amiga chapter in this book, because all the hardware tricks in the Atari 800 were all sort of precursors to what came later on by the same set of engineers when they defected and did their own spin-off company called Amiga, which eventually got bought by Commodore, which is where my heart is. That's the company that I sort of fell in love with and went to work for as a student intern while I went to college. So I was kind of there after the third generation stuff. And I guess I would have been part of what might be labeled the fourth generation wave, but I was never truly a hacker and programmer. Things like the C programming language, which took the place of assembly in most people's hearts by that time, never really appealed to me. I've tried it and never took off, nor did those other languages like BASIC ever really appeal to me. And so, what appealed to me was Deluxe Paint by Electronic Arts on the Amiga computer, and sort of getting at one with the capabilities of the hardware and making it do all this wonderful graphic stuff, but without actually being a programmer. I coveted the people who are from what was called the demo scene, who could make Amiga hardware sing and dance with these psychedelic patterns on the screen and this incredibly, precursor to rave-like music called mods. And I just never took that technical dive for whatever reason. And whenever I reflect on it, I become sort of like riddled with regrets. But then I think, I just never, my heart wasn't in it. Either I didn't pursue the education enough, or it was never presented to me properly, but it was there. My dad put me in a computer science summer camp when I was 12. I had access to Apple IIs, which I never pursued because they were always run for during the computer classes. Everyone else ended up on the TRS-80s. I was one of those. I never considered it worth fighting for the Apple IIs. There are other people who are in it much more than me. And then when I fell in love with the Amiga computer many years later, I'm talking the difference between 12 years old and 18 years old, I fell in love with it as an application user. I did some minimal hacking. I actually simulated what is today commonly, used as Macintosh application package bundling, by which you put all the dependencies of a program into a directory and make a double click on the directory's icon, run it from out of that directory, and knowing relative to where that was done from, where all its dependencies resided inside that directory. When you dragged and moved it, it copied all its dependencies around. I did that with a program called WBScript, written by Howard Harrison, a friend of mine, who was a true computer hacker that I knew all through high school growing up. He was an older gentleman at that time who helped me copy my Macintosh EPROMs to get the Macintosh emulator called AREX. No, that was ReadySoft. I forget the name of it. The company was called ReadySoft. Simon Douglas, that was the name of the developer. It's amazing how this comes back to you. But it was a Macintosh emulator on the Amiga 1000. I ran it. I emulated a black and white Macintosh on my Amiga. I enjoyed pulling the screen down and showing the Amiga operating system running behind the Mac one, and vice versa. It blew my Mac friends' brains just seeing that. But Howard Harrison helped me wrote WBScript, which I used to great effect for all these different little hacks that I did. Because even back in those days, one of the biggest enemies of doing cool stuff was paths breaking, dependencies being unmet, the libraries that you needed not being there. So I fixed all that on the Amiga. It never took off. It was a sub-niche of a sub-niche or whatever. And so the Amiga went away. I switched to basically web development on the Microsoft platform using VBScript under Active Server page with IIS and SQL Server, and it had a totally different feel. But then that went away, and I got into this totally, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me mentality, and got almost soured to the whole field of, computers. As soon as you got into something, it disappeared. The platform disappeared on you. And if you were not the rock star who could do brilliant things and cash in on that tiny little, window of when you knew how to do cool things on the cool platform, then you were always playing catch up, running after the flock. And I didn't like that feeling. So these days, I am using Python. And Python, particularly on a variety of Linux and Unix-like platforms, is giving me the closest thing I've had to that Amiga feeling again. And I'm seeking something fundamental, something super cool, worth knowing, something that is like reading and writing. So I've given up hopes of ever being one of these hackers like they talk about in Steve Levy's book. But what's sticking with me is that computer literacy in the modern age means being able to think in a machine language way, a more precise way than the spoken language, but every bit as expressive, and sometimes every bit as verbose and repetitive. And I know programmers out there who would, choke me for that opinion. People from the Ruby on Rails do it once camp, DIY, don't repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself camp, DRY is what I was thinking of. But along with my discovery of Python is the falling in love with a text editor called Vim. And Vim is an almost magical environment where you become one with the text on the screen, and I enjoy typing. And so the opposite of don't repeat yourself, DRY, is we enjoy typing, wet. And I believe I am going to make part of my mission to instill the love of the timeless and obsolescence-proof and disruption-proof aspects of computer literacy into my daughter. And I think Python's the right way to do it. And I think my challenge is going to be to make it interesting enough for her. And she's into Yokai Watch, and she discovered the Yokai video game on the Nintendo DS, which is inevitably going to be in her future. And she very much thinks of me as that coding guy and that science guy. She loves Gravity Falls, and I'm doing whatever I can to associate myself with a Ford character, Stanford in Gravity Falls, and to a much lesser degree, Rick from Rick and Morty, Rick Sanchez, to the degree I let her watch that program, which is always an issue, but she's exactly the kind of kid who can not be scarred by it and come off much the better. So there's at least 2 role models in cartoons these days who are the fatherly or grandfatherly mad scientist who opens the world, who opens the many worlds to your disposal, and enjoyment and an adventure. And Addie certainly is associating me along those lines, and I encourage that, and I will continue to encourage it. So I'm looking for every opportunity I can to strengthen and enhance that connection and really make her the master of tomorrow's world. Because, wow, when you look at where computers were when the Hackers book was written and where they are today, I can only barely begin to imagine where they're going to be in Addie's future when they couple with robots and a lot of real-world interaction. And that's pretty much it. I'm setting my goals in these vague ways, these abstract ways, but they are my goals. I'll be helping with the homeschool technology aspect of her education, trying to set her on a path where the world is her oyster. And that's pretty much the end of the thought. Thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.